Hi, everyone, and welcome to the last speaker series of the semester. I was going to say give a round of applause to Natalie, but you kind of preempted me. Oh, let's have another one. Thank you, Natalie. My name is Alana Nafziger, and I'm the Graduate Student Coordinator for the LAEP Speaker Series. I'd like to also thank today my delightful predecessor, Addison Martin, who graduates and goes on to bigger and better things out there in the world, including a position at OJB. So let's have a round of applause for her as well. The Speaker Series is a wonderful opportunity where we get to interact with remarkable people in and adjacent to the professions of landscape architecture and environmental planning. As a land-grant university, Utah State University campuses and centers reside and operate on the territories of the 8 tribes of Utah. The Logan campus is situated in the Sahivigoi or Willow Valley, the ancestral lands of the northwestern band of the Shoshone Nation, where Shoshone people have stewarded the land since time immemorial and continue to live today. We acknowledge these lands carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. We affirm Indigenous self-governance history, experiences, and the resiliency of Native people who are still here today. First, we're going to hear from our speaker. Then it will be followed with a brief Q&A. And then we can all meet in the common studio upstairs for some refreshments and to continue the conversation. If you need credit for being here, the Slido code will open after the Q&A. Please enter the code found on the wall, followed by your A number, your name, each course, and you need to separate everything with commas. There's an example here, and if you have further questions, Deandra can answer them when the time comes. This particular lecture is made possible by Craig Johnson, so I'll be speaking about him before I introduce our speaker. Craig Johnson is a force who joined the USU Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning faculty in 1966, and was an integral part of this department for an unprecedented 42 years. Craig's areas of expertise include planting design, land reclamation, urban forestry, and wildlife habitat planning and design. During his impressive tenure at Utah State University, he enriched the educational experiences of countless students and conducted innumerable environmental planning and ecological restoration projects. His enormous impact on this department led him to be selected for Teacher of the Year numerous times, and even during his sabbatical was recognized at University of Arizona for his outstanding teaching. He is an honored emeritus faculty, has received multiple awards for his work from the ASLA and APA and the American Institute of Landscape Architects, and in the words of his brother, Todd Johnson, is a good dude. He unfortunately could not be here today, but we are very grateful for him, and his support has made it possible to bring our speaker, Chris Creasey, here today. Chris Creasey is a landscape architect with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Omaha District, focused on large-scale interdisciplinary civil works and military projects throughout the Midwest and Mountain West. His practice includes work on tribal partnerships, lands bordering the USACE managed waterways, interagency project for NPS, Fish and Wildlife, and the Department of Energy, stormwater management, and master planning for 7 military installations spanning 5 states. Chris is one of our own and earned his BS in Landscape Architecture and Sustainable Systems from Utah State University in 2017. He began his career at Sasaki Associates, a position which he landed by enthusiastically hounding an advancement board member while a student here, so keep that in mind. And returned to his native Boston, where his practice included all phases of design, from planning to construction administration, at a variety of scales and places across the country, from Baton Rouge to Denver. Creasey's career has emphasized practical storytelling and utilizing technology to convey complex designs into accessible conversations. This emphasis has facilitated meaningful client and community engagement, leading to end products that represent the local community. In both public and private practice, Chris is highly engaged in a wide array of disciplines, working together to create a holistic approach to project work, making the story of the project come to life.
Well, thank you, Alana, for that introduction.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I was really last here 7 years ago, but I feel like I was sitting in those chairs just a minute ago. And the first time I was sitting in this room was in Dave Anderson's Intro to Landscape Architecture course, which I, before that, really didn't know what this profession was or what I was getting myself into, but I'm so glad I did. And the topic today is intersections of practice, and that's sort of the first one, is right now and as you advance your career, how can you tie back into education? How can you intersect with students and working professionals to further that database and essentially feed that knowledge back into the system? So today, the primary intersections we'll be focused on are private and public sector work, but I really want to emphasize that piece as well. And that I'm really thrilled to be here, and please reach out if any of this resonates with you. I'm more than happy to talk. So today's talk is 3 sections. The first is projects and purpose. So I'm kind of giving you a field report from the professional world of landscape architecture. I am not, a fully seasoned professional. I'm not a total pro, but I've been doing this for 7 years now, and want to kind of give you the insights and tools to make the important decisions for what's coming after graduation, and also steer you in the right direction for right now. And we'll be framing this through a peek, not a deep dive, into several public and private sector projects and what purpose those provide to the world. And also that ever-elusive work-life balance question, which sort of has taken on this amorphous meaning, especially in the post-COVID world. How do you form a healthy and symbiotic relationship with your career? And I know you guys are in the heat of your final projects, so I kept the look at compensation and advancement to the end, so you'd stick around here. And again, this is really specific to my practice. I hope there's some lessons that are broader and you can take something with you, but I do want to emphasize everyone has their own path to take, and there is no right answer. There are some wrong ones, though. So projects and purpose. What do you want to work on? And this starts now. This time in school is so critical, and you're never going to have more time than you do right now to advance those basic skill sets. It's a lot less fun to be working on, just your basic design chops or AutoCAD or Photoshop skills when you have a principal breathing down your neck and a limited labor code that you're working off of. So utilize that time you have now, so it'll make your life a lot easier into the future. And I emphasize that with the image on the left, which is one of my projects here from Utah State and a GIS course I took that kind of got me further into data visualization, something that's been really important in my practice. As landscape architects, a really important part of our job is to take complex data and turn it into digestible bites that sell good ideas. So starting with Sasaki, Sasaki's a Boston-based firm. I was there for 4.5 years out of school. As Alana said, I hounded our alum here to get that position and head back east where I'm from. And I'm going to talk today about my first project there, the Dayton Riverfront Master Plan, and Greenwood Park, which is currently under construction and was my last project at Sasaki before I made my transition. So before I get into the actual riverfront plan, I just want to talk about the graphic on the left, which the idea is that graphic designers are your best friend. That is not one of my graphics. That's one that came from a kit of parts that our graphic design team provided for us. Landscape architects, we have some of those skills, but it's really not our full forte. And the more you can utilize different design professionals to give you more time to focus on your design and communication efforts, the better, so that you're not focusing on whether your orange is too orange and you can focus on what your actual design is. So the project study area for the Dayton Riverfront was 26 neighborhoods across 4,000 acres, which is a pretty overwhelming amount of information right off the bat. This project was overseen by the Metro Parks, 5 River Metro Parks, as the name implies. There's 5 separate bodies of water coming, all converging on downtown Dayton. And there's a whole series of park systems throughout that at the moment of the project were really disconnected. So how do we take some regional mapping, conceptualize some corridors into something that's more digestible, and bring the scale down to, human-scaled park spaces and connections? And the first part of that, in pretty much any process, is I'll advocate for public input. So once you've got some of that analysis done, you're feeling good about you've done your homework, it's important to bring this to the public and to go where people are. People are not in town halls. Some people are, but not everybody. And parks and markets are where people are. The internet is where people are. If you want to represent the community in your designs, you really need to visit them in their space and avoid those governmental spaces when possible. So we went to the community with our plans just on a weekend in a park during a concert series. So you already have something that you're stemming off of to drive that participation instead of relying on whatever advertisement you've done yourself. And so out of that public engagement period, we had about 3,000 website visits and more than that in terms of entries for where do people work, where do they study, where do they live. Being able to map that granular data and crowdsource your site inventory and analysis is a huge benefit. And that was another great part of Sasaki, and something to look out for in firms is, do they have a kind of R&D department? What are they doing to advance the technologies that allow us to convey ideas? So we were really fortunate in that we had an amazing team of programmers who were designing custom websites for user interface and user input. We had custom add-ons for all our programs that made our jobs easier. And so again, going back to that collaborative, design is a collaborative effort, and we don't have to carry the whole load ourselves. So after that website visit, we had to look at how do we take all that information and synthesize it into something that the public can initially react to. So one of the ways we did this was through this neighborhood placemaking day in the life exercise. We took our 4 study area corridors and created kind of day in the life scenarios for what you might do within that corridor. Where are the main connection points that people hit? So we had the Wolf Creek weekend, the Wright Brothers Parkway is through this area, so spending some time there. The cultural corridor, family experience, how do you get to neighborhood resources like the YMCA, nature play in parks, the sunset at a destination park along the strip. And my favorite was the Mad River Commute, which Dayton has a series of whitewater features in their downtown, and on our client team, one of them was an ex-Olympian slalom kayaker, which I didn't know was a thing, but that was her multimodal means of transport to work every day, was to paddle down that river to their main office in downtown Dayton. And so I hope this kind of represents the fact that it's our job to guide clients and the public towards the answers they want, not just for them to provide information for us to synthesize or spit back at them. It's a back and forth relationship, and you need to look at what the best tools are for that particular client and situation to help that relationship flourish. So diving a little deeper into where I was a little more comfortable was the park design section. So we had 10 different metro parks as part of this study. And how did we take those moments that we discovered throughout the inventory analysis process and turn them into executable plans? Looking at this as a whole big picture allows us to take funding, maintenance, amenities, giving equitable access to different communities, and also regulatory. I did these 2 projects because they also had some Army Corps of Engineer involvement. A ton of levees, and we needed to manage those expectations when we were connecting to the river in terms of what does a site look like that still has that flood protection function, but is more engaging for the community to get down to that space. And so this vision and concept for each, really looking at it from a systems type of place, it gives us an opportunity to also bridge that gap between planners and construction. A lot of the time, if it's just a planning-only effort, there's some oversights just because they don't see what a landscape architect or an engineer might see. So part of our job is also to help planners lay out feasible, buildable plans. And kind of our last level of granularity here, diving into one of those 10 parks, we wanted to break down these concepts into categories and bites that were essentially you could do piecemeal across a long period of time. So we identified big moves that would be transformative gestures within these spaces, but we also identified quick wins that didn't require a lot of regulation, didn't require a lot of money to make a change in that park and drive community interest, which also can drive future funding and be able to essentially execute those park features and those big moves that are the ultimate goal for the project. That kind of breakdown also helps you when it comes to value engineering, which is kind of an inevitable part of most projects. You're going to have elements that get cut, and having those elements able to scale with your project, both materiality-wise and size and implementation-wise, can help you keep your design intent through that kind of gruesome process. So, kind of going from a large-scale system to something relatively small. Greenwood Community Park, it's a 660-acre park in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And the first picture here is from just before I was involved in the project. My very talented coworker, Lon, who's in the hat there, developed this 20 by 24 foot laminated map for their public engagement piece. They had a crawfish boil kind of block party deal and really drove that community engagement to get buy-in on that master plan. And this was Josh Brooks and Anna Corse project, two of Todd's contemporaries who now run the Denver Sasaki office. They opened that a couple of years ago now. And I also want to touch on this plan, this beautiful plan, because Lon is just a pro when it comes to hand graphics. And I was talking to Dave a little bit about this earlier, that'll serve you throughout your career. It's kind of a weak point for me. I remember Dave walking through and seeing my kind of empty desk in the studio with a few monitors there and saying, "Man, you live in a digital world, huh?" And I've kind of taken that to heart because that's an easy trap to fall into, the cleanliness of the digital world. But design is messy. Don't forget that. You're going to have better products if you remain loose throughout that process. So this master plan was really important to the community. This is a historic zoo as well here in an underrepresented community. The Baton Rouge area was segregated all the way up to the 1970s, and so this was a kind of redlined area that was historically underinvested in, economically disadvantaged. And it was the first African-American golf course in the city, and was really used by that community, but has kind of since fallen into disrepair. And so a big part of the plan was to revitalize the zoo, and the entry used to be down here, which sort of separated it from the rest of the park experience. So our first big move was to flip around the zoo entrance to really integrate it with the rest of the park system. The golf courses, there were two of them there. They were also losing money over time, and it was a poor use of land. Debatable, but golf courses and cemeteries, those are two tough ones. So we reduced that down to a 9-hole course, which allowed us to open up a lot more space for some of our ecological restoration. You can see here our 200% increase in tree canopy and 100 acres of forest return to a healthier maintenance environment. And there's also, again, that Army Corps piece, reducing the 100-year flood event by 6 inches off our site. So we have to look beyond our borders. Are we being good stewards of the land that we're impacting past our project site? And so this meander was introduced into a channelized, really eroded out stream bed throughout this process. And that was able to capture more of that runoff, as well as some dredging of the pond and some other BMP features throughout the site. So when you're dealing with something that's as large as a 660-acre park, you also have to break it down into those bite-sized pieces. So we worked with the community on which of those pieces needed to happen first, and it's currently being executed. And I just want to dive a little more in detail from that large-scale plan in this. A large part of what I do is construction documents, so really translating those ideas into physical plans and how it gets constructed. A lot of the time, we have a lot to learn from those construction professionals. So how do we bridge that gap as well? So one of my main areas of focus was this entry plaza for the new zoo entry building. It was this really whimsical space that had integrated different biomes throughout it. So we had lodgepole pine forest on the west side of the plaza and this more bayou cypress forest on the east. And there were some tricky design solutions in there, like not integrating handrails along the bridge for code in that. So we had to work with our civil engineers to make sure we still had water flowing and working its way through this system, but reducing the fall height on that to 3 feet. So it's the little things that make your big ideas possible. And I also just want to touch on these graphics because a lot of the time, especially if we're rushed, we're just grabbing entourage from wherever, but representation in your graphics matters. So if you're not representing the community that you're building for in those drawings and they don't see themselves in those spaces, it's a big problem. And also have fun with your entourage as well. That's my wife loading the kids onto the bus over here. So we had a nice white mall photo shoot. So feel free to use your friends, family, whoever you need to get that elusive pose that you can't find on Scalgabar. And the last piece of this I want to touch on is thinking about our relationship with sort of hard landscape elements, roadway design, parking lots. Flipping the zoo had sort of the unintended consequence of invading this formerly undisturbed area. So there's our new entry building being constructed and the parking lot area. So what we did for this, since it's this really nice mature tree canopy that makes the park vibrant, was designed backwards. So we went with an arborist out, we identified all the trees that we wanted to keep, and we designed the parking lot around that. So it was a larger area, but it was more conservative in its approach to actually impacting that landscape. And following through on that is critical. A lot of the time, our construction professionals will kind of put up some fences around those trees initially, and then if you're not paying attention, they'll fall over, they'll have backhoes on those, or heavy equipment compacting that soil. So following your work all the way through construction, so it's not a disappointment both to yourself and your client, is really important, especially when it comes to irreplaceable features like mature tree canopies. And I just want to touch on in closing before I move on to the Army Corps piece of this presentation, the importance of tracking what you work on throughout your career. Things will start to blend together as you build up a large portfolio, and you're going to start forgetting some of the lessons learned along the way unless you do actively participate in documenting what you've done throughout your time somewhere. So this is most of my projects I was fortunate to work on while I was at Sasaki, and it's kind of a nice personal touch point on how your career is going, if it's what you envisioned, and where your design blind spots might be, where you need to learn some things that you haven't worked on yet. So switching over to a pretty different world, as was mentioned, 2.5 years ago, I moved from Boston to Omaha, Nebraska to start a job with the Army Corps of Engineers out of their Omaha District office. And we'll be focused on two ends of the spectrum for practice there, the Lower Brule Sioux Reservation and a barracks project for Fort Carson, Colorado. First, I just want to touch on the Army Corps of Engineers. It's me going into it, I did not know much about it, so kind of want to just do a quick overview. The Army Corps is one of the largest design firms in the world. We have 37,000 employees, but out of that, less than 300 are landscape architects. And even less than that are practicing. Most of them are planners, project managers, regulatory folks. So getting more of a presence of landscape architects in there and that diverse opinion to kind of meld with more engineering solutions, it has been really critical. And I have that LA location map on here. And that big circle right there is Nebraska, and that is just me. So that kind of shows the scale of these, and that actually there's 2 of us now, so that might be 2 of us, but we need more landscape architect is essentially the gist of this. Omaha District is also the largest geographic area that the Corps represents, and as such, we have our own plane to fly us around to these remote areas. So I never thought I'd have my first time in a private jet working for the federal government, but that's how it's worked out. And then just touching on some of the other pieces that we do in the Corps. So there's been a real shift in the agency towards more nature-based solutions in the last decade. Our ERDIC Center, which is Engineering Research and Development Center, they're out of Vicksburg, Mississippi, of all places, but they've been pushing forward this Engineering with Nature pamphlet and booklet with landscape architects heavily involved to integrate more natural solutions into these historically primarily concrete, hard engineering solutions. Less concrete, more collaboration with the natural world. I'm currently part of a study that you can get involved with a lot throughout the Corps, but it's called the Silver Jackets team to look at using wood-filled riprap and vegetated revetment mats in place of harder armoring and channels so we can vegetate those more and have more ecosystem value. And the other piece on here is, landscape architects often play the long game, especially if you have a foot in that planning world. So it can be nice to have some element of your work that, provides instant gratification and a visible, tangible benefit quickly. So the Blue Roofs team, we work with FEMA to get temporary roofing on disaster areas after hurricanes. So we go to Virgin Islands, Hawaii, Florida, really anywhere within the US, and help local communities get back in their homes quicker. So I have the space within my career now to pursue some of these research-based opportunities, as well as some kind of quick hit efforts that provide relief to local communities. So the first project, the Lower Brule Shoreline, it's part of the Sioux tribe there. And it's the first project to be completed as part of the Tribal Partnership Program, which is a federal program that does cost sharing with tribes to execute built work. There's a few other federal programs in kind of that same line. There's the 1135 program, which is, again, kind of remedying the sins of the past. It provides matching dollars to townships to improve ecosystem services for previously built core projects. And above is the first part of that project. This is still under construction. We need some new drone footage, but it's a new recreation area and armoring of that shoreline along with the town of Lower Brule. So Lower Brule, this is actually the third location for their town. Our involvement in this location started all the way back in 1944 when the US government deemed fit to build dams along the Missouri River and authorized that action. In 1963, the Big Bend Dam was built, which formed Lake Sharp, this area here, and that really devastated the Sioux tribe, Lower Brule Sioux tribe. It removed 22,000+ acres of their most arable land, their kind of riparian zone within that historic river corridor. And we shifted their town here, dug up all the grave sites, shifted the whole cemetery because the US government deemed that a better cost-benefit ratio than moving out the white farmers and white communities further downstream. So third location here, and this white line is essentially where the erosion would occur at these sewage lagoons if there was no action taken. So the first part of this project was to execute kind of an emergency response to not have the sewer lagoons breach into the reservoir. And that's why we're here today. So unintended consequence of building a dam along with flooding that valley is also that you're creating a static water level. So as that water continuously laps against the same piece of shoreline, the erosion rate is just off the charts. Especially in somewhere that's real cold like South Dakota, you have ice shove events in the winter that really just claw away that land. And so 450 acres of land are expected to be lost if we didn't take any action within the next 50 years or so. And you can see some of their recreation elements, in a really relatively short period of time disappearing into that area. And the federal government really is not in the business of handing out new sovereign land, so the lost land is a permanent kind of scar on the tribe's landscape. This was what the landscape originally looked like. They had this very culturally important Brule Island, and you can see how that sort of disappeared in these two comparable aerial images. So it's roughly here at the bottom of Lake Sharp now. And these are our project reaches. There's 4 reaches as part of this project. There have already been some efforts. This is upstream. The Jandrew site is a pilot program for generating new islands in this area that can have some of that cultural significant plantings, things like that. And this now is pretty heavily vegetated. It's a great case study. A lot of the indicator species that guided the forming of that have been starting to show up in that area. So there is some progress in that area. along with serving as a breakwater to keep that shoreline intact. And so this is the first executed part of this plan, the Wada-Nazin boat recreation area, essentially. So that was that first aerial image, was of this zone here, which has a beach, some other recreation elements, as well as this walking trail that goes out along the that armored revetment. It also forms a wetland zone within here, and also a benched terraced planting zone to introduce a lot more of the historic cottonwoods and willows throughout this region that no longer exist along that shoreline. And so this is it under construction. The whole thing is powered through solar irrigation systems that are scattered throughout, and this water isn't stagnant because it's able to flow through culverts that are at intervals, letting that water in and out of those constructed wetlands. Learn from your designs though. So we learned in this, zebra mussels are an invasive species here, and they clog up. That's the same gateway. So they will fully fill in our culverts in a single season, as well as some sediment, since these are flat bottom culverts, so they don't have water pressure to flush those out. So lessons learned for our future reaches in getting these kind of wetland systems to function a little more smoothly. And this is sort of the vision for the fully completed plan. In the next 10 or so years, we'll have 3+ miles of armored shoreline with 7,200 new trees. And we have a really great partner up there in Joel Bish. He's our kind of tribal liaison. He's actually a fellow USU grad and has been up there for a number of years. He's our tree guy. So he's planting all these saplings and giving us, the statistics on what's dying and what's living. So we get to make design adjustments as we go for the soil profile, the height to the water table, all those sorts of things. So staying engaged throughout that design process and doing that kind of post-occupancy review is really important to the success. We're also including an island in this. It's about 9 acres or so. And then this cultural peninsula that will give the still living tribal members a place to teach the current generations about historic, important cultural species, medicinal species, because, this was only in the 60s that this occurred. There's still living members of that tribe that know that history, but it's rapidly going away. So the timeliness of this is important. And I just will end this section saying, passive destruction of property is still a form of imperialism. So we really need to give agency back to tribes as we move through these projects. And speaking of imperialism, we're kind of transitioning to the UEPH barracks project. UEPH is, I even have to read it, unaccompanied enlisted personnel housing. It's kind of a fire hose of acronyms in the Army Corps of Engineers, you'll find. This project is a 46-acre compound, kind of this entire area here, that will be built out for 1,800 beds. An interesting fact is that bases have square footage maximums, and Fort Carson's has been maxed out for a number of years. So anything they build, something old has to come down. And so efficiency is really important, as is kind of the real estate for that. And a lot of this area, you can kind of see all the setbacks on all of these structures. They reflect post 9/11 ATFP, anti-terrorism force protection standards. And essentially it led to these incredibly large 100+ foot setbacks from everything. There's a great book on this. It's called Americatown by Mark Gillum. And it talks about our greatest export to other countries being our kind of worst suburban impulses on military bases, and compares density levels and Okinawa and things like that. As you can also see, there's just an incredible amount of hard stand in this area. This is 40+ acres of 18-inch thick concrete with zero drainage. And so stormwater was really not accounted for in the way it needed to be when the master planners were originally looking at the overall Fort Carson master plan. Because looking at our site that we have slated for our barracks, what is it currently? It's stormwater management, which is already causing issues downstream because there's not enough capacity. So a lot of the time when we're handed these projects, we're handed A&E's master plan. And we were talking about this in studio yesterday, that there is nothing sacred about a particular master plan. Everybody's making things up all the time. So if you see somebody doing something that's not as good as you could do it, speak up. Like, if you see something, say something, because that's how bad designs get built. So anybody, what issues do you see with this master plan other than that it's visually ugly?
How do you get from one building to the other?
Yes.
That parking lot on the far south is completely inaccessible unless you go down that entirely long corridor.
Correct. Yep. Yep.
And then there's that other road that goes nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
You've got more parking than you do building.
Correct. Yep, those are all good answers. So essentially that's it. Connectivity, there's no additional stormwater management through here, it's just the existing basins. There's no recreation space, trail connections, other connections to work and eating establishments, things like that. And there's no relation to the site or the other buildings or thought to the existing topography. And it's using a pretty old school approach of hugging that parking and embracing that instead of making that a space for people and not vehicles that are built into that. And the orientation is also just not that great for solar exposure and things like that. So we got this plan. They said, hey, pick one of these 8 buildings essentially, and that's what you're going to be designing. We said, hold up, we don't want to build any of these. Can we essentially redesign this? And they said, yes, but your funding expires next week. So in 3 days, me and the architect came up with a couple configurations that tried to more embrace that stormwater management piece of this, creating spaces for unaccompanied personnel living in these spaces. And we provided a couple options that we'd be comfortable with. So always provide options and always couch them in terms of what you prefer. Never, the client always has a way of selecting the one that you liked the least. So never present a plan that you're not able to defend and that you wouldn't be comfortable moving forward to. So yeah, along with incorporating stormwater into this, we really focused on the buildings all having a relationship with one another. And the southern site was selected as our first project. They signed off on kind of this new general orientation that is still kind of changing and shifting just because of some of the square footage requirements that we only have so much leeway with. But just quick and dirty, this is our 2-day plan for what that preferred concept was. In that original master plan, it was a 1-to-1 parking ratio. So you got 1,800 people living there, you got 1,800 parking spaces. We were able to get the base to agree to a 0.7 ratio, and there's actually an existing parking lot here, so it allowed us to actually remove an entire bay, several hundred parking spaces, to increase our stormwater detention area, which is also an interesting challenge on this because places with airfields don't like birds. It's called bird airstrike hazard, and so we essentially have to design pleasant spaces that function well, but aren't the most friendly to species actually taking up permanent residence there. So that's been kind of a tricky balance to fill, but I'll let you know how this one advances. So even more than our civil works project, which from a landscape architect perspective are more enjoyable generally, landscape architects on military projects I feel like are really important. They cut down on the export of these sort of cookie cutter hellscapes across our global reach. And again, this is just tracking in the 2.5 years that I've been there, what I'm working on, touching base with yourself, what balance of projects am I working on and where could I maybe devote more effort. So the second piece of this presentation, work-life balance. Laval Morris, founder of the USU program here, LEP program, he had a great quote as he was retiring. He said, "Perhaps I have become impatient in the endeavor to save the students from the swilling in the complacency of mediocrity." And I think we all kind of need to keep an eye on that. And I want to really hedge that first, is that when I say work-life balance and talk about some of these hours that you see on the left and such, I'm not saying balance is not mediocrity. It's not the same thing. Don't fall into that sort of trap. Aim high and you can go anywhere from that point. It's also, though, not shameful to have a life or make money for being good at what you do. So don't feel like you need to take a lesser than position to fulfill some grand design sense. And I also really want to emphasize that I believe the private design sector experience is critical. I would not have been able to get my job with the Corps or have any real impact there if it wasn't for my 4.5 years at Sasaki. It kind of builds the necessary skills, time management, critical thinking in this pressure cooker environment where you're surrounded by a ton of really talented people to succeed in kind of a less high pressure job that does potentially facilitate some of that complacency that we want to avoid. And also just thinking about, what are you creating that balance for? Don't create that balance so you can watch more Netflix. Make that so it's for family, friends, other passions and projects. Private runs the spectrum on what time you'll have to do other things. I have a lot of friends who are in that design world, and landscape architecture is their world, and they find passion and enjoyment in that throughout their career. But a lot of people need other things to satisfy their overall kind of life goals. And so the charts on the left also, it's like there's other practical elements, like how much sleep do you want to get throughout your life? I wasn't getting much here at Utah State, and that trend sort of continued in my time at Sasaki. So it produces some awesome outcomes, but your body can take a hit sometimes. Whereas there's that, perfectly balanced chart here at the Army Corps of Engineers. And I do want to say, anytime federal hiring standards and federal practices, you can't work for hours you're not paid. So I get overtime for any hour that I am taking, or get compensated in extra PTO, which essentially gives you unlimited time. And make room for things you enjoy. Find other creative outlets, and it'll help your process and help those ideas kind of manifest. Sometimes designs need space to breathe, and doing other creative endeavors can help that idea, pop into place for yourself. So in the office down here, LaValle Morris has some, incredible woodworking sculptures, and in my extra time that I've found through my switch, I've taken up woodworking, and it was just something I would never have had time for in my other career. And I got married this December and was able to make all my groomsmen these, custom gifts to show them that I really care about them. So it's nice to have that space for other creative endeavors. I'll just end on a Dolly Parton quote, honorary Dollywood landscape architect. Don't get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life. All right, so the last part is compensation and advancement. And this first slide is really just talking about some resources that you can go to find out what other people are making in the design profession. Office for Personnel Management sets the salaries across the federal government. USA Jobs lists all sorts of jobs across the spectrum, federalpay.org. And then Transparent Utah, a lot of states have sites like that. They're legally obligated to disclose the salaries of any public workers. So you can look up pretty much anybody who works for the state on that website and what they're making. Another great tool is this Design Salary Hub that has salaries for landscape architects, urban planners, architects. It's a crowdsourced website. They usually get a little under 1,000 hits every year, updates on where people are working and how much they're making and how many years of experience they have with that. So on average, with a license out of that pool, the average is about $97,000. Without a license, it's closer to 74. So this is where I really want to emphasize, get your professional license. It brings up our profession as a whole and allows us to talk on an even playing field as licensed engineered and other allied design professionals. And it also just makes you more marketable, and in the long term, you will make more money. So your 0 to 1 experience is that 61,000 or so is the average, and that's sort of right in line with inflation with what I came into Sasaki making. I arrived there making about $50,000. And the other great resource is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Every couple of years they put out maps that show annual mean wages for different professions and where they're employed. And we were talking a bit about this at dinner, but that it's hard to track our profession because it's so varied, but they do their best, and turns out Utah's a pretty good place to work. Generally speaking, just don't go to North Dakota. Yeah, Utah is one of those higher income kind of states. So in terms of advancement throughout your private side career, generally, hopefully you all are pursuing internships. It's a great way to form those relationships and get that real life experience. When I was here in the program, I first had an internship in Salt Lake with MGB&A, and then the following year at Stantec in Boston. And those experiences really kind of drove me to pursue the route that I did. From there, I was hired as a designer at Sasaki, remained that for 4 years before being promoted to an associate status. And then from there, it's pretty variable, but a lot of senior associate type things occur in the kind of 7 to 10 year range. And then going on from there to principal, associate principal, which then have more leadership roles in the company, board member, CEO. And that's where these incredibly varied salary numbers come from, if there's stock options or any sort of cost sharing or profit sharing involved in that. So switching over to a very different system that you can tell right away is from a bureaucracy, is the government system, which is a GS scale, GS 1 to 15. In those GS scales, it is a 10-step program, not something most Utahns know something about. But it takes 18 years to get to the top of that scale, and it's a different kind of yearly spectrum to get to each of those. Unfortunately, Utah is on the lowest end of the adjusted income across the actually entire United States. They're at 16.82 adjusted locality pay, whereas California, for example, is at 45% on top of your base pay, and the national average is around 21%. So be paying attention to those items as well if you're pursuing a job in federal government. And then just looking into advancement within my actual organization in Omaha District. So first of all, we are led by a colonel, but it is a pretty much entirely, not entirely, but vast majority of our people are just civilians, not enlisted. We're not obligated to any sort of service or anything like that. And I am under the engineering division's design branch in the civil and environmental section. And then from there, it kind of breaks down into that GS scale. So our interns around 3 to 5, an engineer or a landscape architect in training is that 7, 9, 11 path. A GS 12 is after you get your license, so that's where I came in because I did have that licensure in hand when I was coming to the Corps. And then GS 13 is kind of the chief of those sections, or a technical 13, which is a pretty unique role to the Corps. If you're looking at other agencies like NPS, Fish and Wildlife, most 13s have regional responsibility. They're either guiding a whole district or they have management responsibilities for 60-plus person teams. The Corps has 13s that really focus mostly on design and leading smaller scale design teams. So we have 3 technical 13s in our section, myself, one of our civil engineers, and environmental engineer, which allows kind of a lot of freedom to explore some of those research options and further my technical knowledge while still developing leadership skills. And to conclude my talk, I'm just going to come back to what I started with, which is please reach out. Todd introduced me to famous landscape architect Gary Hildebrand in the bathroom upstairs here. Take the opportunities that you have. As I said, Mark Dawson and Sasaki, I just pestered in the hallways. So when you have those opportunities, embrace them and negotiate for yourself. We want you to succeed, and that's why we're here. So please reach out if you have any questions. And I think we'll open that up to Q&A then. Thank you.